My name is Jennifer Geddes, and I'm the director of the Jewish Studies program here at UVA. This is the second event in the Arts and Sciences series on enabling difficult conversations, following our event in April with Dartmouth professors Susannah Heschel and Tareq about their long history of teaching the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and bringing students together for conversation. In this series, Arts and Sciences hosts conversation partners with expertise in bridging areas of difference and enabling difficult conversations, and those that take place in the context of negotiation are among the most difficult. Before we begin, I have a mundane announcement and an exciting announcement. The first, the mundane one, has to do with asking you to silence your cell phones, which I'm sure you've all done, so let's turn to the exciting announcement. The next event in this series will feature award-winning New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman and former Palestinian Authority Prime Minister Salam Fayyad on January 28th in Old Capitol Hall. We encourage you to register as soon as registration opens in a few weeks. After tonight's event, you are all invited to a delicious reception, which is going to be in Gibson 341. Basically, you go out the store, on the right, and go up to the third floor. There are signs directing you there, and it's very delicious. I helped pick the menu, so I'm sure you'll each of you should have received an index card, which you can use to submit a question by raising your hand or raising the card and looking meaningfully in the direction of an usher. Ushers have name tags like this, and they will be standing like hawks at the back of the room, ready to get your card. After the first part of the conversation, Dean Acampora will turn to asking your question. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Jewish Studies program and the Department of Middle Eastern and South Asian Languages and Cultures. We are also extremely grateful to Or Grossman and Amy Weinberg at the Brody Jewish Center for all of their logistic help in making tonight's event happen. Finally, it is my great honor to introduce the host of tonight's conversation, Dean Acampora, who has made the topic of belonging a central focus of her leadership in the College and Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. Her commitment to making UVA a place where we can have difficult conversations, where we seek to make sure everyone is made welcome, and when we are committed to learning from each other, has made this meaningful place to work and to study. So please join me in welcoming Dean Christa from Acampora.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction, Professor Geddes, and to you. I want to underscore what Jenny mentioned at the beginning about you're interested in that event in January. Sign up as soon as you get access to the link. This event actually sold out, and we were able to make it available on the Jewish Studies YouTube channel, which I did not know existed. So hello, YouTubers. But thank you for being here tonight. I think we're really in for a special treat. This evening's discussion on the long history and complex context of peace negotiations in the Middle East comes, of course, at a pivotal moment. We are deeply privileged to host Dennis Ross and Ghaith al-Omari, who bring decades of experience in shaping and negotiating peace efforts in the region. Ambassador Dennis Ross serves as the William Davidson Distinguished Fellow at the Washington Institute, and he has played an instrumental role in U.S. Middle East policy across multiple administrations. Ghaith al-Omari serves as the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Foundation Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute, and his extensive experience advising the Palestinian leadership offers us invaluable insights into the challenges and pragmatism needed in the pursuit of peace. And as I was preparing for this event this evening, I reviewed multiple other events that our guests have participated in and can see that they have a long history of collaboration to share their experiences and skills with students, educators, and leaders around the world. And so as an educator, I am especially grateful for your commitment to that, for the time that you spent with our students this afternoon. I have heard rave reviews about that time and the time you'll spend with our faculty tonight. Our hope for tonight is to move beyond the headlines, to explore the real work of diplomacy, the strategic calculations, compromises, the seemingly unyielding obstacles, and the moments of breakthrough. This conversation matters because the Middle East remains a region whose stability impacts global security, economic stability, and humanitarian interests. And it also matters because these skills are highly applicable to a variety of conflicts that make it challenging, but also terribly important that we find ways to live together. I think it's especially fitting that we're having this event here at UVA as a place committed to understanding complex histories and fostering informed dialogue. UVA offers an important setting for reflecting on these global issues with depth and respect. Thank you all for joining us, and our co-sponsors, the Jewish Studies Program and the Department of Middle Eastern Languages and Cultures. And with that, I think what I want to do is simply jump right into it. We have such a great set of topics to guide us this evening, and so with that, I just want to invite our speakers to join me at the table. So let's just jump right to it. I know you've been busy all day long, but I know you have a lot to share. So to begin, I thought I'd ask each of you to help us gain a broad perspective on how the history of peace negotiations in the Middle East has shaped today's diplomatic landscape. And perhaps you could touch on some of your specific experiences that illustrate the ongoing challenges and how that impacts what's needed and what's possible now. And so, Ghaith, I think you are beginning here.
He gets all choked up when he talks about this topic. First of all, thank you and apologies for this. Okay, let me start from the beginning, really. Initially, the conflict was seen by Palestinians and Israelis, by Arabs and Israelis, as a zero-sum conflict. The idea has always been, really from the 1940s, even before, that the only solution to this conflict is by the elimination of one of the two sides. And this is really what defined this conflict from the beginning. And if you look at the history of it, you see wars, attempts to solve the conflict through war, through eliminating the other through wars, be it 67, 73, 82, all of these wars. But you see other ways of trying to get the zero-sum results. You see it through the narrative tools. You see both sides trying to deny the existence of the other. You see us on the Palestinian side going to the UN, getting a resolution that says Zionism is racism, hoping that this somehow will erase Israel from existence. You see the Israelis denying our national identity. The infamous Golden Year line that there's no such thing as Palestinians, etc., etc. And in the end, I think the decision to move to peace diplomacy has been very much based not necessarily on noble ideas, but on the realization that all of these attempts at a zero sum basically didn't work. You know, to put it very bluntly, I think the lesson that my generation learned is that the Israelis are going nowhere and the Palestinians are going nowhere, and somehow we have to find a solution to this problem that recognizes that both sides exist, but also goes kind of a bit deeper than this. And I think when we started the process of negotiations, we also started discovering things about ourselves and about the other side as well. And I think one of the key issues that at least my career as a negotiator, but I can see it with other colleagues of mine, other negotiators, is the realization that at the end of the day, not only are neither side going to disappear, but also a slow realization that both sides have a very compelling and very just attachment to the same piece of land. And I cannot tell you how many times in negotiations I have tried to convince Israelis that they have no attachment to this land. And similarly, by the way, they try to convince me the same. And in the end, as you get to know people, as you get to engage people, you get to realize that no, when an Israeli says the land really matters to them, they mean it. It's a genuine belief. And when I say that the land really means something to me, it also is a genuine belief. Now, why do I say this? I say this because at the end of the day, and you move it to what's happening today, we can talk about what's happening in Gaza and the mechanics of it, but at the fundamental level, I am very worried to see a narrative emerging again that basically does not recognize this fact. A narrative today that does not recognize that both sides have a very strong right and a very strong attachment to this land, and both sides will have the right to actually exercise their attachment, their national identity through a state of their own. This is why we have the idea of a two-state solution. It's not only a diplomatic tool, but it's also a tool that reflects the very nature of this conflict. I fear, and I will conclude with this, that today, because of the trauma of the Israelis after October 7th and of the Palestinians during the war in Gaza, that we're going back to this model of mutual negation that I fear will not result in a resolution of this problem, but rather will result in a repeat of the same tragic history that me and my generation were part of. So there's a sense of urgency right now, not only to solve the diplomatic aspect of it, but also to re-examine and re-present what this conflict really is about. How do you get both sides the dignity and the rights that they deserve?
So let me be a complement to that. It's one of the critical things that needs to be understood. President Obama once asked me, why is this conflict so difficult to resolve? And I said, because it's not a right and a wrong. We're trying to reconcile two rights. There are two national movements that are competing for the same space. They're both deeply rooted. There has been, as Ghaith was saying, a zero-sum approach for a long time. When did it begin to change? And why has it reverted back to the way it was before? It began to change really in the aftermath of the 1973 war. The 1973 war was Egypt and Syria not fighting a war of annihilation, but fighting a war to get land that they had lost in 67 back. That was different. 67 was supposedly to avenge the loss of Palestine. 73 was to get lost land back. Already that represented a kind of change. Henry Kissinger launched what was in fact a conceptual approach to peace building by saying, we can't solve this all at once, but we can solve it by beginning to create an incremental move, a series of incremental moves that once you establish new baselines and you show that agreements are possible, then larger agreements will become possible. Jimmy Carter negotiates the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty, which also has an Israeli-Palestinian component to it. There's a bilateral peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, but there's also a framework for Middle East peace, which creates, in truth, what is a framework that is taken by the Bush administration when we get to Madrid. Madrid is a conference in 1991 that breaks the taboo on negotiations between Arabs and Israelis. Oslo, which comes in 1993, actually changes what has been an existential conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. because these are two movements competing for the same land, it's not like a state-to-state conflict where you have to work out, okay, what will the borders be? Yes, borders are a part of this, but when you're both claiming the same space and you're coming up with what is going to be an agreement, you're actually coming to grips with the fact that, okay, I have to actually coexist with the other. And by coexisting with the other, what it means is I'm accepting that they will exist, and I'm accepting that when I tolerate them, it doesn't mean I'm engaging in a negation of my own case. Prior to Oslo, which was a psychological breakthrough, prior to Oslo, the mutual rejection of Israelis and Palestinians was driven by the sense that if I accept the other side, it means somehow I'm negating my own right, my own claims. Oslo represented overcoming that psychological divide. So we turned what was an existential conflict into a political conflict. That was the good news about Oslo. The bad news about Oslo, and you're looking at two people who were intimately engaged with this, the bad news about Oslo, in the end, we didn't succeed. We came close, not so much with the Camp David summit, but with the Clinton parameters, which offered an American bridging proposal which would have provided for two states, a Palestinian state that would have had East Jerusalem as its capital, a Palestinian state that would have had 100% of Gaza and 97% of the West Bank, a Palestinian state that would have provided not the right of return for refugees, but at least the right of return for refugees, Palestinian refugees, to their own state, an approach that would have provided for security. In a sense, this was a comprehensive offer, and it wasn't accepted. The Israelis did accept it, the Yasser Arafat did not. Ghaith was actually part of the Palestinian negotiating team. I'll let him speak for their attitudes, but they were basically willing to accept it. So we lost what was an opportunity at that time. Honestly, one of the great, I would say, ironies is we're in 2024, and there really hasn't been the kind of diplomacy that we saw at that time since. If you look at the Bush administration, initially they sort of walked away entirely from, they even sort of outlawed the term peace process. I was the American envoy, and they chose not to have an American envoy. And the reason was there was a sense, look, we can't do what Clinton did, so we won't engage that way. What's ironic is in 2007, Condi Rice, the Secretary of State, decides, actually, we really need to make an effort to resolve the conflict. But the effort to resolve it in the end didn't involve three-way discussions the way it had during the Clinton administration. But there was a serious effort for 2 years. It didn't get into the same level of detail, although it did produce bilateral talks between the Israelis and the Palestinians, which in the end didn't succeed. Since that time, with Obama, with Biden and Trump, what emerged from Trump was the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords represented a kind of interesting reversal of what had been an important premise for many, I would say, who worked on it here, but also in the Middle East. There was a concept of linkage. And the concept of linkage was you couldn't have Israel normalize with Arab states until Israeli occupation of Palestinians ended. The Abraham Accords basically demonstrated that there were Arab states who were no longer willing to forego what they saw as their interest in having agreements with Israel in the service of a Palestinian leadership that they thought was incapable of ever acting to produce an end to the conflict. What we found since October 7th of last year is for Arab states who thought you could ignore the conflict, we found you actually can't ignore the conflict. Now, the really bad news of where we are, and I'll just conclude with this, you have, as Ghaith was getting at, you have parallel traumas. You have two societies that are suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome. For Israelis today, it's still October 7th, 2023. The hostages are still being held. If you travel around Israel, you will see their pictures everywhere. There's been no accountability for what happened on October 7th, and that's also part of why there isn't an ability to get beyond it. the suffering of Israelis is paralleled by the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza and the Arab world that sees the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza. And what that has produced is an inability on each side to grasp anything but their own pain on the one hand. And until you get beyond Gaza, and until you begin to reestablish a sense of possibility that's been completely lost, it'll be very difficult to get back to the kind of peacemaking that existed before. I will say that I am sort of an inveterate believer that you never give up. I will say that one state is not an outcome that will produce peace. One state, because of these two national movements, because of these two national identities, because these two national movements and identities will never somehow be prepared to give those identities up, they will not coexist in one state. And if you look around the Middle East and you see states that have more than one identity, whether it's national, sectarian, or tribal, those are states that are at war with themselves, paralyzed, or completely hopeless. That should not be what we wish for Israelis and Palestinians. But we will not really be able to get back to real peacemaking until we get to the point where we can reestablish a sense of possibility. I think there are steps we can both talk about how you can reestablish that, but we also have to be realistic about what's possible. If you push to settle the whole thing right now, you'll guarantee a perpetuation of the conflict. If you think somehow that one state is the answer, you will guarantee a perpetuation of the conflict. In a lot of ways, the Kissinger concept of incrementalism is probably what's required right now. And we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that if you can make progress, that progress itself begins to create a belief again, and that's what we have to reestablish.
Thank you for that. I feel like I gained a lifetime of knowledge in just the answer to the first question. So you set a really high bar. But I'm wondering whether we might dig a little deeper and draw on those lessons that you shared with us. Thinking about your prior experiences with negotiation, thinking about where we are right now, your joint characterization of a recognition that you've got traumatized entities, unprepared to be parties in a negotiation of this sort. Just invite you to reflect on from your experiences, some particular moments where you witnessed and observed some of these features as opening possibilities. So I'm thinking, what I heard from you is it can't be thought of as a zero-sum game. You've got to show that some progress is possible. Probably don't try to get it all at once. And focus on solutions. Can you share with us some particular moments that stand out to you from your experiences that you also think could shine a light for a path forward?
Want me to start? You want to do it?
Go ahead, start.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to give you an extremely poignant moment. And also the context, in some ways, is not that different psychologically from where we are now. In early 1994, actually February 25th, 1994, you had an Israeli settler, Dr. Goldstein, who went into the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron. This is the tomb of Abraham. So Abraham is, he's revered by both Jews and Muslims. So there's actually a joint at the burial site of Abraham. There's actually there's a joint site for Jews and Muslims. And 29 Palestinians were gunned down by Dr. Goldstein, who was a reservist. He's wearing his Israeli uniform. And he goes in and guns down 29 Palestinians. And, this was a catastrophe. We had, Oslo got launched in September. We had not yet reached the first implementing agreement, and everything came to a halt. And I actually, because Israel didn't have relations with Tunisia, I arranged a meeting between an Israeli delegation with Yasser Arafat in Tunis, and I flew them in on my plane. And at the very beginning of the meeting, Amnon Shahak, who at the time was the deputy chief of staff of the Israeli military, came in and in a very emotional, poignant way, he said to Yasser Arafat, today, because of what was done with someone wearing my uniform, I will bear a stain forever. I can't come and simply apologize to you. An apology is a weak thing for me to do. It doesn't capture what I feel. It doesn't capture the shame of all Israelis for what was done. All I can say is we have a lot to make up for because of that. We will do what we have to do. We believe in making peace with you, and that's why I'm here. And Yasser Abdel-Rabo, someone Ghaith knows well and worked for, immediately says, not good enough. And Yasser Arafat says, no, it is good enough. And we use that to resume negotiations. Now, if you had asked me when we were flying in there, did I think that we would be able to turn things around quickly, given what had just happened? My answer would have been no. My answer would have been, we'll need this to sort of create an opening, but we're not going to be able to turn it around very quickly. But it showed an emotional connection, and it produced a change, and within 2 months, we had the first implementing agreement. So yes, I mean, we have experienced a lot, and obviously, this wasn't the only event. There were a lot of suicide bombings in Israel. And the ability to take at that time what were these body blows and still somehow maintain a process that was moving towards reconciliation shows there was a capacity. Now we're at a point now that is, I would say, is lower than that, but it is a reminder when there ultimately isn't an alternative. As Ray said, the Israelis are not going anyplace, and the Palestinians are not going anyplace. You cannot wish the other side away. So we will find a way to get back to what has to be done. There are examples like that one that demonstrate we have some precedence for it.
Actually, even for me, I would say two moments come to mind. One was personal, one I observed from the outside. The personal one was actually during the Second Intifada. The Second Intifada was basically an armed conflict between Palestinians and Israelis after the collapse of the negotiations. And it was bloody. I mean, it was a war. And I remember sitting in my home in Ramallah, an Israeli tank literally parked outside of my home. There was some people shooting at one another in my backyard. I was, when you're in the situation, you find the one corner in your house that is least likely to be hit by a bullet. So there I was, on the phone, with the chief of staff of the Israeli Prime Minister. Why? Because there was at that time a breakout of, I think it was a bird flu or one of these things. And even if we were shooting at one another, at the end of the day, we had to talk and figure out what to do with this bird flu. At the end of the day, if we did not work together, the outbreaks would have gone elsewhere. To me, this was, it would have expanded. It would have been a major public health issue. To me, that was a major reminder that politics aside, security aside, the nature of the relation between the two sides just means that you just cannot have a situation where you pout and refuse to engage. If you pout and refuse to engage, reality will come and hit you. And today, as we think of the reality today, there are so many aspects of the two sides have just to deal with. I mean, we saw it with COVID. We're seeing it with issues that relate to climate change, which in that region is not tomorrow's problem, it's today's problem. It's already problematic there. We see it with so many different areas. So no matter what our politics is, at the end of the day, you have to engage, you have to work together, not because you want to do a favor to the other side, you do it because you need to do it. That's the nature of the engagement. Now, the more public side, the one that I was not part of, was actually similar to the story that Dennis said, but it was related to Jordan. In that case, in the mid-90s, soon after the peace agreement between Israel and Jordan, a Jordanian soldier goes and opens fires and kills, I think, 7 Israeli school children. Now, schoolgirls.
Who were 12 years old.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about, young girls. You're talking about real kids. Now, King Hussein of Jordan at that time, his public, I mean, his advisors, and I know some of those guys, were advising him, do the proper thing. And the proper thing is what? You issue a condemnation, you basically arrest the guy who did the shooting, and call it the end of the day. He said, no, I need to do something more. So what he did is he flew into Israel, went to the homes of the families of these girls, sat down on his knees, and asked for forgiveness. Now, he could have easily gone away, which is basically doing the bare minimum. And things would have gone fine and things would have survived. Yet, that was, in his view, that was not enough. When he did that, I think that did more for Jordan-Israel relations than any degree of economic, security, diplomatic agreements have. Until today, people who are Israelis, who are of age to remember that, would still have so much deep commitment to the relation with Jordan, not because of policy reasons, because of these issues. I mean, often when we deal with diplomacy, we think, because as lawyers, as diplomats, we're taught to think in very concrete terms. What is agreement? Where are the borders, etc. It seems to be off. The reality is that diplomacy and peace are not only about logistics, they are about how do you get a sense of trust with the other side. And this is only tested during crisis. I would say this is very relevant today, because today with the anger that we all feel as we look at what's going on there, the justified anger that Israelis feel about what happened on October 7th, and frankly, the public support that many Palestinians gave to that, and the justified anger that Palestinians feel today about what's happening in Gaza and the unwillingness of many Israelis to recognize where it steps the line. It's very easy to go into this normal, let's get angry and let's tell the other side how ugly and how bad they are. Yeah, it's emotionally satisfying, it's safe, it's an easy thing to do, but at the end of the day, this is not how you build relations that endure. This is not, at the end of the day, the war is going to be over. Palestinians and Israelis have to move forward from it, and the more that we can now establish moments where we can fall back on, moments of trust we can fall back on, like what King Hussein did, like what Amnon did with Arafat, the more that we can actually deal with the inevitable challenges that will come in the future as we start to kind of figure out how to dig our way out of this current tragedy.
Well, those were some really terrific examples, and reminds me of the importance of recognizing each other's humanity in the context of these negotiations. I want to shift a little bit to thinking about the larger global context. And Dennis, I know you were just on an MSNBC interview right before, moments before coming into the room. As you think about the possibilities for the resumption and the likelihood of success for resumption of negotiations, how do you think about the larger global context, changes in leadership, other activities that are happening in the region? What should we be thinking about as we watch these things unfold in the months to come?
Well, one of the things that needs to be understood is that Iran doesn't create the conflicts in the region, but it seeks to exploit every conflict in the region. It has created these proxies that it uses to create basically intimidation and coercion against regimes. And in places like Lebanon, it actually determined what the government could do and not do. Now, why do I say that in answer to your question? Because Iran and what it calls its axis of resistance, I actually refer to it as the axis of misery, because every place where Iran has influence, those are countries that are either paralyzed, failing, or failed. What has happened as a result of what Israel has done, Hezbollah, the crown jewel of that so-called axis, has been dramatically weakened to the point where whether or not Lebanese can take advantage of the moment, they're in a position where they could actually take back the sovereignty of the country. You have to when I say the crown jewel, you have to understand how important Hezbollah has been to Iran. It trains all the other militias it built their indigenous arms production capabilities. Nasrallah, who was the leader of Hezbollah, who the Israelis killed, along with the entire leadership cadre of Hezbollah, Nasrallah would actually, he would broker understandings in Iraq between the different competing Shia militias there. So Hezbollah is a shadow of itself right now. It hasn't disappeared, but it's dramatically weakened. Iran itself. Iran on October 1st fired 200 ballistic missiles at Israel. When Israel retaliated on October 26th, Israel took out the entire strategic air and missile defense capability of Iran. They took out 90% of Iran's ballistic missile production capability. Iran is profoundly vulnerable today because of what the Israelis did. So you have an Iranian axis, Iran and an Iranian axis, which has exploited conflicts and built the fear of what they could do. Suddenly that's dramatically weaker. Now, military achievements that aren't somehow tied to political objectives end up being tactical achievements, not strategic achievements. The reality is there needs to be a strategy right now that is designed to focus on how you take advantage of these. The Biden administration doesn't have a lot of time left. It's trying to, having produced the ceasefire in Lebanon, it's trying to see if it can come up with an end-of-war plan in Gaza. You know, I suspect that may not be possible before the end of the Biden administration, but there may be some things that can be put in place prior to Trump coming in. President Trump has said he wants these wars over before he comes in. He will have leverage with Arab leaders who want to be on his good side. He has a lot of leverage with Bibi Netanyahu. It would be difficult for him to be saying no to Trump. There are those within Netanyahu's coalition who want to annex the West Bank. Trump says he wants to expand the Abraham Accords, which he means Saudi Arabia. Won't be possible if there's annexation of the West Bank. So you have a different landscape right now that lends itself actually to creating an approach that actually might begin to turn the landscape of the Middle East in a dramatically better way. But there has to be an informed sense of, okay, what are we trying to get done from a political standpoint to take advantage of what has been a new military reality where Iran right now will have very little interest in causing trouble because of its vulnerability. It could, of course, decide, given that vulnerability, to go quickly towards a nuclear weapon. That would confront the Israelis, but also the Trump administration, with a difficult choice, although it could also confront them with an opportunity where you go to the Iranians and say, you're vulnerable, we can take it all out. Let's do a deal where you scale back dramatically your nuclear program. It's possible for President Trump, who says he's a deal maker and who says if he had a second term, he would have done a deal with the Iranians. Possible to see that that could take place. We'll see. I would be on a larger, from a larger frame, the Russians might decide to help on that in return for a kind of responsiveness to them on Ukraine. It's not something I would like to see, but I don't dismiss that as a possibility. My point here is you have changes taking place right now. You have a number of leaders who would like to create a relationship with Trump. In a sense, he has leverage, and the real question will be, is the administration put together in a way where they can take advantage of the openings that have been created?
Along similar lines, I mean, let me start maybe with just the overall landscape. And you talked about Russia. I would just be keeping a very close eye on what's happening in Syria right now. The last couple of days have been rather dramatic events, and what's been very interesting in these dramatic events is that the Russians have been nowhere to be found. And Russia, which basically, after the Arab Spring, particularly after the Syria civil war, that basically their message was the Americans can protect their allies, but look at what we can do for our allies. that narrative is actually maybe upended right now. So if you look at it, kind of zoom out really, if you look at it from a great power competition point of view, we're actually, the US is again now in a much more, in a much stronger position. And similarly, when it comes to China, which many were saying, oh, we'll look at it as an alternative. China over the last year has also not proved itself to be a particularly useful actor. You look at what's happening in the Red Sea with the Houthis basically disrupting all of the trade. What have the Chinese done? And the Chinese have a lot of leverage vis-a-vis the Iranians. They looked after their own interests and basically said, don't hit our ships and we don't care about everyone else. So this actually has put the US in a much better position as we are coming in. But there was also another kind of strategic realization that happened over the last year. As Dennis mentioned, before October 7th, there was a sense in the Arab world, in the United States, in Europe, elsewhere, that the Palestinian issue is basically manageable. This is a bilateral issue between Palestinians and Israelis, can be contained. You know, unfortunate for the Palestinians and Israelis because it doesn't really bother us. October 7th and what happened after that totally shattered this concept. What we saw is that what started as a bilateral war has become now a regional war. Today, I cannot remember the last time there have been so many open fronts in the Middle East. Everyone's shooting at everyone else. How the Iranians use this, how it unleashed a lot of problems within and intra-Arab and intra-region. So the landscape has really shifted in that way. But it has not only shifted in negative ways, I think it has also shifted in some positive ways. And it has sharpened the fact that the region right now is divided between two camps. Dennis, you talked about the axis of misery, axis of resistance, basically a camp that sees the way that it can advance its interest is through disruption. The Iranians are the masters of it, but others think the Assad regime, think of some of these other actors. But there is a new emerging axis that is actually now being more solidified. And that's an axis of countries that believe that stability is actually in their interest. And understand that stability cannot be ensured simply by looking inwards. You know, if you go to the Gulf, to Saudi Arabia, to the United Arab Emirates, before October 7th, we said, we want stability, but we can only achieve stability if we kind of disengage and look inwards. Now they understand, no, you cannot do that. You have to have a regional coalition because the challenges are regional. That creates, in my view, actually a great opening for the United States. But for the United States to take advantage of this opening, of course, in addition to, we have to wait and see what the next administration is going to look like, what's the staffing, what's the dynamics. But at a more fundamental level, we in this country have to figure out what we want to do with the Middle East. In some ways, if you look at the policy of successive administrations, really after George W. Bush, be it Obama, be it Trump 1, be it Biden, our uniting thread that goes through that as it relates to the Middle East is a desire to exit the Middle East. Obama called it pivot to Asia, now we call it great power competition, etc. We want to exit the Middle East, but we want to continue to also be the primary external power in the Middle East. It doesn't work that way. We have to decide, do we want to lead the Middle East? Do you see the Middle East as something that is relevant for our interests? And I suspect that after the last year, it's very hard to say no, seeing how what's happening in the Middle East very much impacted not only our strategic interests, but also some of our politics here. But if we want to do that, then we have to realize that leadership does not come at the cheap. Leadership means that we have to re-engage. Re-engage diplomatically, obviously, re-engage economically, but also we have to re-engage militarily. Yes, we do have a lot of assets in the region, but the region, both our allies and our adversaries, believe that we are not willing to use our military force. No one's arguing we have to be trigger happy and go bomb everything we don't like, but if we are not willing to show that we are willing to back our diplomacy with force, then our diplomacy will be meaningless. We will become just another country, you know, like Canada, like Europe, whatnot. It's a decision that we have to make. If we do decide we're going to take leadership, I think the region is quite ready for us to take leadership. More than ready. When I go to the region, talk to Arab leaders in the Gulf, Jordan, Egypt, they're dying for us to take leadership again. But until we show that we're willing to do it, they'll continue hedging their bets. And if they hedge their bets, then we should not be surprised that we cannot shape the development in that region that ways that are beneficial to our own interests.
Can I make just a quick comment on that?
Absolutely.
In a sense, what Ghaith is talking about is diplomacy works when there's leverage behind it. If diplomacy has no leverage, if there's not a coercive element to it, and when I say leverage or coercion, it can be positive and negative. Negative may involve threats and the implementation of threats, which, by the way, are not all military, but it can also offer inducements. So when you deal, for example, with the Iranians, if they understand that the consequence of continuing with their nuclear program or looking like they're going to move towards a nuclear weapon could mean they could lose their entire nuclear infrastructure, which they have spent probably $500 billion on, it gives them an incentive to see if there's a way out. But if you don't offer them a way out at the same time, they're not likely to take it. So you have to think about coercion from the standpoint of not putting someone in the corner, but being in a position where they understand the use of force is a possibility, and they can make it more likely or less likely. Also, when I say the use of force, you can't look at the use of force or the threat of force in terms of either we have 150,000 troops on the ground or we do nothing. There's a whole variety of steps in between that you can engage in. And in effect, what Ghaith is talking about is we need to be seen as prepared to make threats on the use of force, but also effective in terms of giving those who might be fearful of that a way out to avoid it.
Yeah, so from both of you, I heard some really helpful ideas about leadership and how to think about leadership in a global context. And it's a good transition to the last prepared question that I have, which is my cue to remind you that if you want to ask a question, now is that moment to look meaningfully, as Jenny put it, toward an usher, and the questions will come and we'll have some time to talk about that. But while we're collecting those, you generously spent time with our students today. We have a lot of students here in the audience as well, and some of them, I feel certain, have been inspired by your work and are curious about opportunities for entering the field of diplomacy. Do you have some advice or guiding principles for those who are hoping to make a meaningful impact in international relations and peace building?
Yes. Short answer is yes, not a long answer. First thing I tell this to my own students. First thing is hone your writing skills. It is very important to be able to express yourself clearly, both verbally but also in written form. No matter what you do in life, your ability to persuade others will be a whole lot better if, in fact, you have developed the ability to think clearly and to express yourself clearly. So first is that, hone your writing skills, work on your writing skills and ways you express yourself. Secondly, when I look at a resume of a teacher, I'm not looking to see only what someone has done academically. A lot of what I'll receive, everybody looks good on paper from an academic standpoint. So I'm looking to see, what have you done that shows you're kind of a self-starter? What have you done that shows you're prepared to do things that are practical? If you want to enter into the policy relevant world, what are the kind of experiences that you've sort of sought out? Now, one can be doing internships. So that again, you'll learn a lot, you meet people, you create networks and the like. But there's also a lot of civil society groups, non-governmental organizations. Let's say you have an interest in the Middle East. There are NGOs that do really important practical work on the ground. Not those that are, that have an agenda for one side of the conflict or the other, but those that actually try to deal with the real needs of people. So I have an association with, not in anything other than a kind of emotional association with the Arava Institute that educates Israelis, Palestinians, and Jordanians together, and the Demur Institute, which is a Palestinian NGO that works to try to improve things on the ground and is willing to work with the Arab Institute. There are all sorts of groups like this. And you can go on to different websites and you can find them going and spending time working for them. You'll learn, if this is a conflict you're interested in, you'll learn more about the nature of this conflict. And you'll also see pathways for the way you can begin to change it by working there. So it will, first of all, probably inspire you more. Secondly, you'll learn a lot. Thirdly, you'll meet people who actually will be sort of lifelong connections. And for people like me that look at resumes, say, here's someone who doesn't want to just theorize about the conflict, but they also want to actually do something practical to deal with it.
That's great. I mean, the first thing I would say is, please be part of the foreign policy world. I mean, it might sound intimidating, it may sound hard, but we do need new blood in our business. My biggest nightmare is to get to a point where people are turned off this work. And it's easy to understand why. Our politics is so divided. Government has been so devalued, etc. I think it's tragic if young, talented, well-meaning people stay away from public life. Because if you stay away from public life, someone else is going to fill this void, and most likely this someone else is not someone who has, let's say, constructive, useful ideas and contributions to this. If you're out of the game, don't complain when someone else takes over and runs the game. So to my mind, this is the first thing. It's very important to engage. Now, to engage at this stage, I would say just put a foot in the door. And this, I mean, Dennis mentioned the kind of things. There are tons of think tanks, there are tons of NGOs out there. When you apply, I would argue, get yourself a bit out of your comfort zone, especially when you're at the beginning of your career. Experiment a little bit. If you're, slightly on the left, it doesn't hurt to go slightly on the right, to work your first internship at some slightly, right-wing organization. I'm not saying go to a MAGA kind of organization if you're a progressive, or if you're a conservative, go to a progressive organization. No, but experiment with other kinds of thinking, because it's very useful and valuable to challenge yourself in environments that are not your comfort zone. It's easy to kind of fall into your own echo chamber and think you've got it all worked out in your head without testing some of your ideas on real life people, real life counterparts. No one's gonna blame you for it. No one's gonna hold it against you. But do experiment. Get yourself into it. And at this stage, and I can tell you from my own experience, you might think what you know what you're interested in. There are so many things out there that are very, very interesting that you just don't know about. Experiment. If your first opportunity to go in is something that's slightly off your favorite topic, take it nevertheless. And take chances. Again, at the beginning of your career, you can afford to make a few mistakes. My whole entry to my role was not planned. It was opportunities that came up that I figured, heck, why not? Go for it. So I would say definitely apply, definitely go and carpet bomb all of the think tanks out there. Just get your foot in the door, get it in ways that will not only build your CV, but also will intellectually challenge your thinking. But also, I would say, develop some key skills that will help you succeed in this. Dennis talked about writing, so I'm not going to talk about it, but I think there are two other skills that are essential. One is the ability to basically deal with people you disagree with without immediately going to the kind of to the jugular. A lot of our politics today is about identity, and therefore a lot of our political expression is about attacking other identities. Avoid it. In our business, in diplomacy, in policy, you need to avoid it. If I start having a conversation with an Israeli counterpart saying that everything they stand for is wrong and they're born in sin and all that kind of stuff, forget it. The conversation is over. We need to learn to look beyond identity issues and also learn to look beyond positions. Often we find ourselves, you hear something from someone saying, I want X, Y, and Z, and immediately you're turned off. one skill that is essential in our business is how do you dig beyond the positions to look at the interest. Learn to ask a question of, why do you want this? What are the interests? What are you trying to achieve? Are there different ways of achieving the results that you are aiming for that are less harmful to my own interest? Find indirect ways of doing this. So I think a combination of getting into the business and honing some of these skills. How do you deal with people who you disagree with, even fundamentally? And how do you break down problems into their components and find solutions that can give everyone involved some sense of a stake in success? I think these are the kind of tools that will really help you succeed in our business.
Can I tell a story about Averell Harriman, apropos of your point about thinking about how you deal with others? So Averell Harriman was governor of New York, and then he became a very well-known negotiator for the United States, and with the Soviets, and then even in Vietnam. And he was hard of hearing, and he had a very ostentatious hearing aid. And when he didn't like what someone was saying, he would very ostentatiously just turn it off.
That's a great story, and those were some great answers. So I heard focus on your writing skills, internships, collect some peace making skills, meet people as humans, but also think about how to break problems down into components. I will take Dean's privilege in saying I think that arts and sciences provides the backbone of a lot of these things. So thank you for that. All right, we have time for a couple of questions, and I'm so grateful for just how many people submitted them. So the first one is, both speakers movingly related moments in which leaders stepped forward to offer respect, apology, and mourning for the other side's dead. What do you think it would take in the current moment of crisis to move Israeli and Palestinian leaders toward such acts of humility and respect?
Do we have to start with a depressing question? Honestly, my view in today's leaders, neither of them is capable of doing this. I really don't believe that we can move beyond, move towards larger progress on this issue with the current set of leaders. The Israelis and the Palestinians need new leaders, and I suspect the nature of the experience of Palestinians and Israelis over the last year will inevitably produce new leaders. No country can go through what Israel went through on October 7th and treat it as a footnote. These kind of failures often end up with systemic changes to the countries they go through. And at the same time, on the Palestinian side as well, there has been a failure of both Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, and therefore I just don't see them kind of surviving the outcome for much longer. So I think in a sense we're gonna have to wait. Now, as we wait, I would just say one thing out there. Leaders are often ones that you can only recognize in retrospect. Most of the leaders do not show that they are capable of leadership until they sit in that chair. There are many examples in the region. To my mind, one of the most consequential leaders in the Middle East in the 20th century was Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt who went to Israel, created the Camp David, and paid with his life for it. Now, what's interesting about Sadat is when he was appointed deputy of Nasser, the legendary Egyptian president, he was appointed specifically because he was seen as the weakest, stupidest, least ambitious of that cohort. Someone who you would never have thought. Nasser wanted someone safe as his deputy, went to the safest guy. That guy ends up being the most obvious one. And, we can talk about others who have evolved. So in some ways, you cannot judge a leader until they are a leader. But once they become a leader, it becomes easier to judge them. And I'm afraid to say that the current set of leaders, I'm much, let's say, I'm very skeptical about their ability to transform and to do these kinds of steps.
Yeah, I wish I could disagree with that. What it takes right now is you would need an Israeli leader who could stand up and say, we suffered a terrible set of tragedies, atrocities that were unthinkable on October 7th. But we also understand in rooting out Hamas, which we held responsible for it, we inflicted a terrible price on Palestinians. Palestinians who weren't responsible for that. And for that, we understand that this is, we also bear responsibility for what's happened. And have a Palestinian leader stand up and say that what Hamas did was unthinkable. It did not represent what Palestinians believe in. It is not who we are. And we, without any qualification, we condemn it. The fact that that hasn't happened is still quite remarkable. The inability to distance Palestinians and the Palestinian Authority from what happened on October 7th is an indication of the limitations there. The difficulty, I cannot envision Prime Minister Netanyahu standing up and saying that, partly given the nature of his coalition, partly given the psychology in Israel. The psychology among Palestinians, the psychology in Israel right now, what we said earlier, each is consumed by their own sense of trauma and their own pain and their own cost. So to stand up and say, look, we understand your pain and your loss. Right now, the political climate doesn't permit it. But there will be a change in leaders. There will be a political reckoning in Israel. It's a matter of time. It is coming. And there will be something else in Israel. Israel, I said this earlier to the students, Israel has never had a systematic debate over what the relationship with Palestinians should be. When Oslo was done, Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres, they made the decision, we're doing this. They brought it to the Knesset, they won by one vote, 61-59. The opposition argued against it. They argued for it, but it wasn't, this was a political vote, it wasn't a debate. When Ariel Sharon made the decision to withdraw 100% from Gaza, meaning all the IDF and all the settlers and destroying the settlements, it was his decision. It wasn't, there was an opposition. In fact, it cost him his party. The Likud voted against the withdrawal, so he created a new party called Kadima. There wasn't a debate. It was the strength of leadership that we're doing this. What is required as part of the political reckoning, which will come, because there'll be a state inquiry commission. How could this have happened? Why was there a policy of building up Hamas at the expense of the Palestinian Authority? This will happen. You will hear all the leaders of Shin Bet come and say, we warned against this policy. So once you begin to have that discussion, you were warning against building up Hamas at the expense of weakening the Palestinian Authority. That immediately forces you to say, all right, what kind of relationship do we have to have? So this will come. It's a matter of time. And when it comes on the Israeli side, it may, I say may, it may spur something on the Palestinian side. Why do I say may? Because there's no history of introspection on the Palestinian side. One of the weaknesses of the Palestinians is not just the nature of the leaders they've had, but the inability to face up to their own failures, their inability to acknowledge the failures. And part of that is because they are weak and they've been victims. And when you're a victim, the impulse is not to look at your own failings. The impulse is look who is victimizing us. We need Palestinians to get beyond being victims. I once said, Palestinians are victims. That's a fact. But being a victim is a condition. If you want to end being a victim, you have to have a strategy that is not basically a strategy built on being a victim, because the only thing that guarantees is you'll always be a victim. So Palestinians need to go through that. Israel has a set of institutions, and those institutions are going to force a reckoning. It'll take longer than many wanted, especially many in Israel wanted, but it's going to come. Palestinians, I'll conclude this with some hope. I know a lot of younger Palestinians who I continue to deal with, and they want something different. They are much better than the leadership they have. And I'm hopeful that we will see them begin to emerge.
Actually,
I thought you might.
um, no, actually, to be honest, I mean, it's painful to say, but Dennis is right. Our history of dealing with our failures and somehow spinning them as successes has done us no good. I would say, though, I am hopeful. I am hopeful, in addition to what Dennis said, and I know a lot of these young people, as I zoom out, I see the Arab world is changing. I mean, the Palestinian identity and this whole victim identity is not unique to the Palestinians. Maybe we have honed it and perfected it, yet it's a hallmark of a lot of the way that Arab identity had formed in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, etc. That was, frankly, the dominant way of having Arab identity, pan-Arab identity, pan-Islamic identity. It's all about grievances. If you look at the literature coming from Egypt, from the Levant, which were the center of gravity in the Arab world. Well, guess what? The Arab world is shifting. And today, the center of gravity in the Arab world is no longer there, it's in the Gulf. This is producing a very, very different mindset. I'm always shocked every time I go, say, to Egypt or the Levant. After a week, I leave depressed, needing a vacation from going there because everyone's complaining. I go to the Gulf, I go to the Arab Emirates, I go to Saudi Arabia. There is a much more positive mentality, a sense of, you know what, history has been unfair, let's build the future. This is becoming a place which is shaping Arab narrative, shaping Arab identity. This is where young Palestinians today want to immigrate, not to New York, not to Paris, not to London, but to Dubai and to Riyadh. And I believe this is creating dynamics that inevitably will trickle down to the Palestinian case. I mean, the young people that we know, many of them actually were formed in these new ideas or were inspired by these new ideas. So big picture, I am more optimistic. The trends of history are going in that direction. How long it's going to take, I don't know. But I have to agree with Dennis. I mean, one of my biggest problems with post October 7th, with a lot of the narrative that I hear, whether among Palestinians or frankly among many here in the United States, is the unwillingness to basically accept that October 7th was not only a mistake, a travesty, a tragedy, a moral aberration, because of a concern that if we say that, we might undermine the very basis of our cause. Well, if we do not accept and call things by their name, then that's how we undermine the moral standing of our case. So I am hoping that this will change. I'm hoping the change will come from the region, but I think people who speak for Palestinians here also have a reputation, a responsibility to also address these issues directly and acknowledge where we went wrong and where we went right.
That was great, and a perfect segue for what I think is the last question that we have time for tonight, even though I feel like I could listen to you both profitably for a very long time. And that is just to invite you to say a little bit more. Let's end on thinking about the role of youth in the future. I get to live with students, and it's one of the greatest joys to be around young people. It gives you hope. So what do you think? You've already mentioned, perhaps in this moment of identity, perhaps in being a part of a broader conversation and debate that needs to happen in Israel. But how do you think about the role of the youth in this pivotal moment? How does a different generation affect this, or not yet?
All right. I mean, first of all, I'm going to repeat what I said in the beginning. If the youth does not get involved, don't complain that things go in direction you don't like. If you want to win the lottery, buy a ticket. If you want to impact policy, be part of the policy conversation. Being angry is not enough. Expressing anger is not enough. Without actual engagement, you will make no difference. Engagement can take many, many, many shapes. From activism to policy engagement, but be engaged, not only be angry. I think that's very important, and I understand. Look, I understand with public life being so ugly, with our politics, our national debate being so toxic, etc. I understand why this is not attractive, but again, if you want to change it, be part of it. So that's one. Two, and this is honestly, to me, this is a very, and I'll be very specific on the Palestinian-Israeli issue. And it's a very hard thing for me to say. Many people who get involved in this issue get involved in it out of a sense of obligation. But many also get involved with, frankly, without really having real equities in this issue. I see many people, frankly, who get involved in this as making a statement about something else. You're for social justice, you get involved in this. You're for, this whole idea of intersectionality where everyone comes together. That's fine. The more that you have people engaged, the better. However, at the end of the day, when one takes positions and one takes public positions, I think it's important to remind oneself that at the end of the day, this is not about me as an individual. This is not about you as an individual. It's not about feeling good, sticking it to them, etc. This is a conflict about real people in the region, real Palestinians, real Israelis. The longer the conflict goes on, the more people will lose life, dignity, livelihood, etc. And you have to ask yourself at the end of the day, do you want to be part of perpetuating this conflict? Frankly, by just making it into such a toxic topic to deal with that you will create a chilling effect for any of our politicians who want to be involved in it, or do you want to be part of resolving this conflict? And I would argue that before you take a position, before you make a statement, ask yourself, is this going to get the conflict closer to conclusion or further away from conclusion? Of course, at the end of the day, everyone has to take care of themselves, of their own well-being. But remember, as you get involved, this is not about you, this is about real people, real conflict, and real futures that your voice can have a part in either perpetuating this conflict or ending it.
So I want to build on that. I would say a few things. One, anger is an emotion, it's not a policy. You want to change policy, anger doesn't help you. You feel that there's injustice, fair enough. Then think about what you can do to end injustice, not with a slogan. Slogans are all about making yourself feel better. They're not about changing anything. So if you're serious about injustice, then focus on policies that create some possibility. The idea, again, that one side or the other is going to disappear, that's not on this planet. These two peoples are not going away. And if your focus is on having one disappear, then you're contributing to the conflict. You're contributing to injustice. You're doing nothing to solve it. So that's one general point. The second point, we spent the last several decades dealing with those who want to win debating points. We're not interested in debating points. We're interested in solving problems. This is a sort of an extension of the first point. If all you want to do is make yourself feel better and say, look, I won that debate, great, fine. But don't kid yourself. Don't try to sell yourself you're contributing in any way to ending the suffering that real people basically experience. When I was telling one story earlier, I didn't tell another one. I told one story earlier about what got me over time so committed to this. I started off actually as an arms control negotiator. And there, all you deal with are abstractions. Throwaway, dimensional missiles, multiple warheads. They're all abstractions. There's an abstract concept that says if you change the relationship between those on each side, it reduces the incentive to carry out an attack. That's an abstraction, it's a theory. I would go here in the negotiations, I came to know on each side the people who had suffered real losses. Once when I was negotiating, I had an Israeli mother come up to me and sort of grab my hands with her child and say, with tears in her eyes, say, please succeed. When I took my kids at one point to the area because I wanted them to see where I spent all this time, and we were traveling actually in Ramallah at one point, and then later in Amman, and people came up to them and thanked them for what I was doing. I didn't put them up to it. I might have if I had thought about it, but you know, the point was real people understand the consequences of the conflict. And if you care about the conflict, you should be thinking about them. Right? That was more my exhortation. The one thing that is more an inspiration is one thing about young people, they tend not to be cynical. And this is, too many people who have worked on this conflict for too long have become too cynical. I can't explain why the two of us haven't, but I can tell you that what is required is, if you're going to have a sense of possibility, you can't be cynical. You know, pessimists can think it's hard to produce it. Optimists may be unrealistic, but cynics think they know better and nothing's possible. We're trying to end the cynicism in this conflict and restore a sense of possibility. And both of us actually believe with all the obstacles, with all the difficulties, that's still possible.
Well, that was some terrific questions that you asked, and truly inspiring answers about recognizing common humanity, focusing on solution, and creating the space for possibility. So thank you so much.
Sure.